Today on Legally Us, Anstead expresses concern about his son Hudson being exploited by Christina Hack. A trial is moving forward in Shakira's tax evasion case. And Chrisley is sued not once, but twice by the same person for defamation. We've got that plus so much more in today's Legally Us. Hey everyone, Christina here with Nima Rahmani, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers and a former federal prosecutor. Nima, it's so great to talk to you each and every week, and we got a lot of big stories to cover this week.
Christina, thanks for having me. Love being on.
Of course. Love having you. All right. Well, let's get to this messy custody dispute. This has been going on for quite some time. So Anstead's recent custody case hearing against Christina Hall revealed his concerns about their 2-year-old son, Hudson, being exposed to reality television and social media. So in court documents, he claims that children involved in television production often have lingering issues that affect their welfare, worldview, and self-image, leaving them diminished and dependent upon the perceived approval of others for their self-worth. He said one of his many fears for Hudson is being forced to film reality TV and the possibility that the public ridicule over seemingly benign content becomes humiliating to him. He even used Kayla Posey, who was in Toddlers and Tiaras, who unfortunately died by suicide not too long ago. He used that as an example, saying, "I urge the courts to review the recent and tragic case of Kayla Posey and a defining, embarrassing meme." So what Christina responded to this. So what did she have to say in her response?
So Christina, I reviewed Christina's filing and her declaration and response, and she said that, look, this is much ado about nothing. These were some social media posts that were filmed on an iPhone. We're not talking about production quality, much less a TV show. And she said, you know what, Aunt? If you don't want Hudson to be on social media, that's fine. He shouldn't be on my social media, and he shouldn't be on yours either. So sometimes when these divorces get nasty, you see the children being used as a pawn, and I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I was looking at his social media, and he was posting photos of Hudson at like a baseball game or something like that, at a sporting event. So if this was you, would you say like everybody has to keep him off of social media then? Absolutely.
And that's what Christina said. And she said, listen, be careful when you're throwing stones, because you're doing the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, this really comes down to the question of legal versus physical custody. So the parties we're talking about, who does Hudson stay with? And, he's with Christina less than 10 days. But it doesn't matter who has physical custody. When you're talking about big decisions like this is a legal decision. It's really no different from making medical decisions for your child. So even though Hudson may be with one parent or the other for more of the time, generally speaking here in California, and this is in Orange County, the parents have joint legal custody. So they have to make these types of decisions together. And if they can't agree, that's when a family law judge steps in.
Right. And it seemed like based on her response, she really wanted to keep this private. And most of this was kept private, except for this clause or this reason that they can't really get behind. So why do you think he went public again with this?
Some of these things are for PR reasons or to inflict pain on your former spouse. And that's what Christina started her declaration saying, listen, this was supposed to be private. We were in a confidential mediation. Now, all of a sudden, you're filing documents publicly. You're going on the press. You're making these accusations. This isn't good for Hudson. If you care about his well-being, stop. Let's resolve this.
Right. And how do you think they will resolve this? Will this go to a family court? Will this go to trial? And who do you think is going to win in this case?
Yeah, I think it's too late to pull it back. I mean, all this is out there. So family law judge in Orange County is going to have to rule on this. And ultimately, if the parties agree that Hudson shouldn't be on social media, and he's not going to be on social media, but it has to be fair, it has to be uniform, and it has to apply to both parents. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think of him comparing this to the young girl that passed away? Was that taking it a bit too far?
Way too far, Christina. You're talking about someone who tragically took her own life, someone who was on a TV show as a teenager. You can't compare that to a child who's on social media and probably really has no idea that he's even on there.
Right. No, so true. All right. Moving on to another messy case. So a judge ruled that prosecutors can move forward in the trial regarding Shakira's tax evasion after she rejected a settlement deal with tax authorities. So back in 2018, prosecutors in Spain accused the singer of withholding 14.5 million euro in taxes between 2012 and 2014. So at the time, her official residence was listed in the Bahamas, but tax authorities claim that she actually was residing in Spain at the time. So which means that she owes taxes to Spain. So she will face 6 counts of tax fraud. A trial date has not yet been set, but prosecutors announced they are seeking an 8-year prison term for her, as well as a $23 million euro fine. She did talk to Elle magazine recently and said, "I've paid everything they claimed I owed, even before they filed a lawsuit. So as of today, I owe 0 to them." So how do you owe 0 to them, yet still go to trial?
Yeah, I mean, you see this a lot in both well-off people and in terms of how the government handles these types of cases. So, for instance, here in the United States, you have people with a lot of money. They'll say that they're living in Puerto Rico, so they pay a lot less in taxes, even though they're living in California or Florida or New York. And on the same side, the government usually will take a few of these high-profile tax evaders, and of course, it's just allegations against Shakira, and go after them aggressively because it sends a message. They certainly don't have the resources to prosecute or even audit everyone. But these high-profile cases do get people's attention. So really, it's going to come down to, where does Shakira live? Is she in Spain for more than 6 months? If so, under Spanish law, she's going to have to pay taxes there. Obviously, she's going to say that she was touring. And even though she had a house there with her ex, she was there less than 50% of the time.
Right. Is it going to be hard for them to prove that she was residing there?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty easy because obviously when you're a famous performer like Shakira, you're going to be staying in hotels, you're going to be traveling the world, and they better have a very good defense, and they better really account for the time that she is out of the country, out of Spain during the relevant years. Because if not, normally if you can resolve something by paying a fine, as opposed to the possibility of going to jail, most lawyers are going to say, hey, pay the fine. This is probably walking around money for Shakira. I mean, she's one of the most well-known and highest paid performers in the entire world.
Right. So you think that they decided to reject the settlement because they do have a really good defense?
I think so. I mean, she's being advised by lawyers and she has good accountants, I believe, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And, when it comes to tax evasion, and this is the law that applies in the US, and I assume it's similar there in Europe, you can rely on a good faith opinion by your tax attorney or your accountant. So again, Shakira has some of the best accountants in the world. I assume she's going to have some of the best lawyers in the world. She can certainly afford it. So I assume that those lawyers are advising her, hey, we have a very good defense. I know you're looking at the potential possibility of jail time, but you're probably going to win this case. At least that's what she's being told.
Right. If she does go to jail, I mean, do you foresee her spending the 8 years in jail that they want to prosecute her for?
Probably not. Rarely do people get the maximum. But, if you have the opportunity to pay a fine, you don't, and then you go to trial, sometimes judges will impose a trial tax. Now, that's a term that isn't actually a legal principle, and everyone has a right to take their case to trial. But some judges punish you for doing so. If she gets up there, she lies, or she perjures herself, that's something that the judge can say, well, hey, you had the opportunity to accept responsibility, pay the fine, and make this go away. Instead, you denied evading taxes, you lied to the court, so now we're going to punish you. So that's certainly a possibility if she takes the case all the way and she loses.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that that's why they're setting a trial date? Because she said that she owes them 0 money. So why, do you think that, like you said, they're still just trying to make an example out of her?
Yeah, I mean, Shakira's position is that she doesn't live in Spain and therefore she's not subject to Spanish law and owes 0. So, whenever you're negotiating pre-trial, there's got to be some give and take. And if Shakira's position and the position of her lawyers and her accountants are that we're not subject to Spanish law, we owe nothing, well, that's very far removed for the more than $10 million in euros that the Spanish government is saying is owed in back taxes.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to Todd Chrisley because he's being sued for defamation for the second time by the same woman. So this woman investigated his tax evasion lawsuit. Speaking of tax evasion again, Amy Doherty Hines, she is a former Georgia Department of Revenue investigator. She claimed that Todd has been spreading lies about about her on his podcast and social media. She said that he falsely and maliciously accused her of criminal conduct during the recent investigation. Todd said that she should be prosecuted instead of him and that he pursued to get her fired. So back in July, she sued him for the same exact thing, saying he accused her of a multitude of crimes and wrongdoing on social media. Of course, Todd was found guilty of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and tax evasion, while Julie, his wife, was convicted of the same charges, plus wire fraud and obstruction of justice. They're still awaiting sentencing, but how can Todd be sued twice by the same woman for the same thing?
Well, sometimes cases are dismissed. So if you're going to pursue a civil claim when there's pending criminal charges, we saw this in OJ, for instance, you want to wait until the criminal case is resolved, because if the target, in this case, the Chrisleys, they're convicted, that makes your civil case a lot easier. So that's probably what happened here. Hines decided to dismiss and wait. And now that the Chrisleys have been convicted and are looking at years in federal prison, Hines's defamation case became a lot easier because, as we all know, the standard of proof in a civil case is just preponderance of the evidence. That's a lot lower than beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard in criminal cases.
Yeah. So can a judge force him to retract these statements? And why isn't he, don't you think?
Well, based on everything the Chrisleys have said, both before and after their criminal trial, they're either delusional or narcissistic. They do not believe that they're guilty, even though a jury unanimously found that they were. The statements they're making in the media, they think they're going to take this case up on appeal and win. And I can tell you, it's very hard to overturn a jury verdict, especially in federal court. This is where I used to prosecute cases all the time. So they're not going to retract anything because that's going to be an admission that could be potentially used against them in the criminal case. So I don't expect to see a retraction. And even if they did, as a matter of law, that doesn't change the fact that an alleged defamatory statement has been made. It might mitigate some of the damages, but it doesn't change liability or fault.
Right. I mean, as a lawyer, is it extremely problematic that they continue on with this podcast and talk about their legal issues ahead of the sentencing?
Oh, this is the worst possible thing you can do because, we talked about it earlier in the show. Judges want acceptance of responsibility. They want someone to come at sentencing, express remorse, repay the amount that they've unlawfully defrauded folks out of. So if the Chrisleys are getting up there saying that they're innocent and continuing to make statements about the people who are investigating the case and ultimately prove that they did all these acts beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, let's not forget, they've been convicted. They are guilty. These are no longer allegations. I can see a judge hammering the Chrisleys at sentencing because, again, they haven't learned anything and they're still maintaining their innocence, even though a jury found that they're not.
Right. I was going to say it's kind of like they're digging their own grave. I mean, so they are facing 30 years in prison. I mean, do you think that they will get the max sentence? Because like we've seen before in other cases, like Teresa and Joe Giudice, I mean, he faced the maximum sentence. I mean, he got deported in all of this as well. So, I mean, do you think that they will, like we said before, kind of use them as an example? And could they face the max 30 years in prison?
I don't think they're going to get the max 30 years. And this is why. Even after they were convicted, the judge allowed them to remain out on bond. If the judge was going to max them out, probably wouldn't have happened. But I still think they're going to look at years in federal prison because under the sentencing guidelines, their guideline range advisory, of course, the judge can go up or down, is through the roof because of the amount of the fraud that we're talking about. And again, they're not going to get any reductions or mitigation because they've accepted responsibility. So by continuing to make these statements on traditional social media and do these podcasts, I think that's something that's going to hurt them at sentencing and probably something that their lawyers see and hear and they start to cringe.
Definitely. And, when it does come time to sentencing, will they have the option, kind of like the Giudices, would they be able to split their sentencing time like they did? So since they have children to take care of, would somebody be able to go in for 15 years and then the other person comes out and they serve the other 15 years? Like, would that be able to work like that?
It's completely up to the judge and his or her discretion to stagger the sentences. They can certainly ask. Now, I do see staggered sentences that when the sentences really aren't that significant, right? Maybe 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. But generally, judges aren't going to wait 15 years, for instance, for someone to surrender to federal prison. So it's really going to depend on the length of the sentence and whether this judge is going to be nice and allow staggering, because it's completely up to his or her discretion.
Going to be interesting to see what that sentencing is going to be like. Nima, thank you so much for running down all things with me. As always, it's always so great to get your perspective and expertise. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Christina, for having me. Love being on, and I'll see you next week.
All right, I'll see you next week. For more news, content, and exclusive interviews, make sure to hit the sub, like, and bell button down below and visit usmagazine.com.